Yes. Hi, I'm Jo Ross, newsletter editor of Bayside Climate Crisis Action Group. Welcome to everyone. I'll start with an acknowledgement of country. I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation on which we gather today, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I extend that respect to all people here today. Welcome to the Goldstein Candidates Forum on Climate and the Future. We are lucky to have Rob Gell here, who is our MC and moderator. Rob is a geomorphologist by training and taught physical geography and environmental science at Melbourne State College and Melbourne University before a 31-year career presenting television weather. He now works as a director and advisor to sustainable technology companies and is president of the Royal Society of Victoria. We invited all known candidates that are listed on the screen. We are grateful that Zoe Daniel, Independent MP for Goldstein, has come. Lana Charlie McCosty from the Greens Party is here. And David Siegel, Libertarian candidate, is here. Thank you. Thank you for coming. Unfortunately, the others are not here, and I need to let you know why. Labor is yet to announce their candidate. Leon Gardner, the One Nation Party candidate, has not replied. Andrew Montgomery, the Family First candidate, is in Queensland and let me know a few weeks ago that he wasn't going to be able to make it. Tim Wilson cannot make it and let me know last night. I received an email from Tim Wilson that will be read out later.
Right.
Bayside Climate Crisis Action Group has organised this forum along with 3 supporting groups: GCAN, Marine Care Ricketts Point and Beaumaris Conservation Society. Thank you to the BCAD committee for the fantastic teamwork in organising tonight. After the candidates have spoken, we will be taking questions using Slido. We have pre-submitted questions that will or have been added to Slido. If you haven't used it before, I can assure you that it's really easy to use and I would encourage you to give it a go. Either go to slido.com and enter the code which is in blue on the screen, or use the QR code and you'll get straight in. We have got a couple of rules. Please include who the question is for, and it can be for one or more of the candidates. All of the questions will be moderated, and any off-topic or abusive questions will not be accepted. We are asking for questions, please, not statements. And on Slido, you can upvote questions that you like, so that the most popular questions will be the most likely ones to be asked. Thank you again for coming. Thank you to the candidates for coming. Thank you to Rob Gell for moderating. And over to you, Rob. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jo, and thank you for inviting me. I checked my notes a couple of days ago, and I think the first time I worked with BK was in 2014. So a long association with you, although it's a bit irregular, but it's nice to be with you again. You're obviously going from strength to strength. I should announce I'm an independent here. I'm not on the electoral roll of Goldstein. I'm in the seat of Melbourne with Mr. Bant, so I haven't got much choice about it. My vote's not worth much at all. For a range of reasons which we won't go into. Thank you. I just want to make a few remarks. I'm really impressed that the conversation that we'll have tonight, it really is a forum, and we want to have sort of civil conversation, as Joe suggested. Is really really comes back to BCAG's primary terms of reference. It's about increasing awareness of climate and sustainability concerns, including practical solutions for those problems. I don't want to limit tonight just to climate. I think there's a range of things that impact on that we can discuss as well, but no doubt it'll be our focus. We really want to, I don't know how many undecided voters there are in the room, but you can turn down those shirts a bit at a bit. But anyway, look, it's really for people who haven't made up their mind. We'll try and preference people who have questions where they're trying to understand some of the critical issues. And as Joe suggests, it's really not a political point scoring night. It's about providing an opportunity to learn about policies and preferences and positions from the candidates who have joined us. And if you disagree with any of them, of course, you can vote in a month or so and make your feelings known. To introduce the candidates, I'll introduce them in alphabetical order, just very briefly to introduce their campaigns. And then we get into some questions. I'll have a bit of a dialogue with them, ask them some questions to see if we can cover the breadth of issues. And then we'll have a chance, as Joe said, to take your questions from Slido and then perhaps some from the floor as we go through. So let's begin with Zoe Daniel, former frontline news correspondent with the ABC, working particularly in the USA, but also in Africa over 3 decades. She's the author of 3 books, including Greetings from Trumpland, which I probably should read. She's the current community independent member for Goldstein, the first woman elected to the seat in May 2022. So you're doing it all again.
Thank you, Rob, and good evening, everyone. And please do not turn down your shirts. If anything, get someone else to put one on. Put that on your list. Look, most people in this room probably know my origin story, but I think it's worth repeating that one of my big motivations for running as an MP was my concern about climate, and that was to do with covering climate disasters around the world. It's something that I've been up close and personal with, bushfires in Australia and in the US, cyclones in the Pacific, hurricanes in the US, and a massive superstorm that hit the Philippines in 2013, which was a formative experience for me, not only as a journalist, but as a person. At that time, that was the biggest superstorm ever to hit the world. And I saw what happened when that storm hit a city of 200,000 people on a peninsula and in effect flattened it with a storm surge like a tsunami that took out pretty much every building that wasn't on elevated land. So to land into that disaster as possibly the first journalist to arrive on a Philippines Air Force C-130 the next day, was for me a moment that I will never forget. And it is a moment that carries me when I'm sitting in the Parliament now, making decisions and having to vote on legislation on things like climate and energy. My son just walked into the room, and it is very lovely that my son managed to get himself here tonight. Being an 18-year-old young man, he's got a lot on. But many of you will also know that it was my children who said to me when I was reluctant to step into the lion's den that is politics in Australia, that someone has to do something for us, Mum. And that goes to trust and integrity in politics, which is still in short supply. And when I talk to people around the electorate in the street, it's actually remains the umbrella issue for most people, lack of trust and integrity and transparency and oversight. But also people, I think, want long-term structural policy thinking. You cannot do climate policy on 3-year electoral cycles. You cannot do an energy transition on 3-year electoral cycles. This is complicated, it's large scale, it's expensive, but it has to happen. And I think those of you who are in this room understand that it has to happen. And of course, many of you in this room put me here to try to affect that change. And I'm not going to sit here and be simplistic about how difficult and challenging that is. But I also hold an incredibly strong position that we can't just continue to go la 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 and ignore the problem. We have to actually step into it and get multi-partisan agreement on how we are going to approach it. So I'll finish by saying, so the others can introduce themselves, that it is disgraceful that neither the Liberal Party nor the Labor Party have announced revised climate targets for 2035. The Liberal Party doesn't even have a climate policy that I know of. Labor hasn't announced a candidate. The Liberal Party didn't even bother to turn up tonight to answer your questions about that. And that is really worrying for the future of our country and for the children who I try to represent in that chamber. Thank you.
Just on Zoe's point there, that there's no Liberal candidate or Labor candidate here. I know that the proceedings tonight are being recorded and they'll be publicly available on the website. If you do have specific questions, and I'll get our moderators Don and Mike to let us know, if there are questions that you wish to ask either the Labor candidate or Liberal candidate, you just want to have them publicly recorded, we'll allow that so that we can be seen to be being transparent and those questions are at least being asked despite the fact that there will be no one here to answer. Now, our second candidate, born and raised in Goldstein, Alana Galley-McCrosty, is committed to bold climate action, affordable housing, expanding Medicare to include dental and mental health, and tackling the cost of living crisis. This is her third campaign, having previously run for Goldstein and Bentley in the 2022 federal and state elections. Alana, what's on your agenda?
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for having me. My name is Alana Galley-McCrosty, and I'm proud to be here tonight as your Greens candidate for Goldstein. I'm glad to be here, standing with a community that understands the urgency of climate action. Australia is currently at a crossroads. We could continue propping up the fossil fuel industry like it's the 80s, or we can embrace the clean, green, sun-powered future we all know is possible. The good news, the solutions are right here in front of us. And the bad news, the majority parties keep looking away. We are already deep in a climate emergency. The science is clear. The warnings are loud, and we can currently see the effects all around us with the recent climate-fueled disasters. Yet, time and time again, governments in power are failing us. They are talking big on climate while funneling billions of dollars into fossil fuel subsidies. They're saying that they care about the environment while rubber stamping new coal and gas projects. Meanwhile, we see power bills soaring, bushfires intensifying, heat waves are becoming more extreme, and the air pollution is just getting worse. We need leadership that's putting communities like ours ahead of fossil fuel profits. The Greens have a fully costed, achievable plan to transition to a cleaner, fairer future. No new coal, oil, or gas projects, ever. Not now, not next year, not anywhere in the near future. Every ton of coal and gas burned makes fossil fuel corporations richer, whilst intensifying the climate crisis. By 2030, we want to see Australia running on 100% clean energy. That's solar, wind, battery storage, and pumped hydro. This is going to lower power bills and keep the lights on without cooking the planet. So right now, 1 in 3 big corporations are not paying any tax. Yeah, and the government hands out at least $11 billion every single year in fossil fuel subsidies. Yeah, funding pollution instead of solutions. The Greens plan is going to cut these subsidies and tax these big corporations. Doing so, we're going to raise over $75 billion. We can afford bold climate action. The only thing missing here is the political will to do so. So people of Goldstein, we do have the power to lead this change. We are living in a community that cares, and we do want something better. If you want real climate action, you are going to have to vote for it. Vote One Greens. Yeah.
David Siegel is our third candidate. He's the candidate to Goldstein for the Libertarians, and he stood also in 2022. He's a former stockbroker. He's attracted to the party's support of fiscal conservatism and its defence of individual freedoms. His focus is on cutting government interference, economic growth, and not cutting economic growth. His focus is on economic growth and to returning prosperity and freedom to families and individuals. David, what are your critical issues?
Oh, thank you. When Zoe mentioned about Daniel and the lion's den, I sort of know how he feels. I'd like to thank the Bayside Climate Crisis Action Group for the opportunity to speak to you. So what will climate future look under a libertarian influence? Firstly, I'd like to bring you some great news. According to the world's official International Disasters Database, MDAT, deaths from climate events have fallen by over 90% over the last 100 years. And I would like you to Google that. This is because in the last 100 years we've invented refrigeration, air conditioning, motor cars, air travel, TV, mobile phones, fertilisers, better aid and relief efforts, better warning systems. I could go on, except I've only got 3 minutes. Basically, man has adapted without onerous government intervention to deal with whatever Mother Nature throws at us. Necessity and market forces have combined to commercialise solutions which have solved these problems. So with the knowledge of this great news, what have we got in Australia? Not only have we a grid that is unreliable, it's more expensive and destroys the environment. This transition was never going to be cheap. In 2008, Barack Obama stated that under their transition, energy prices by necessity will have to skyrocket. Higher prices are a feature, they're not a glitch. We now subsidise renewables because we aren't meeting targets. We subsidise coal so the lights don't go out. We subsidise heavy users like smelters not to use electricity on peak days. We subsidise rooftop solar and subsidise batteries. That's a lot of money going out to try to solve a problem where the number of people actually dying from climate events is continuing to fall. However, if you still feel the need to reduce emissions, nuclear is the only practical option, providing 24/7 baseload and requiring less than 1% of the land with renewables. That's a lot of natural habitat and farmland which could be saved. We believe that man's adaptive abilities, which have served us so well for 100 years, will serve us just as well for the next 100 years. We would continue to encourage adaptation by allowing the free market to develop the best value, most reliable energy system that's possible, which is likely to include coal, gas, nuclear, hydro and renewables. In a libertarian world, Australia, with its abundance of natural resources, can once again rebuild a meaningful manufacturing capability, competitive with the rest of the world. There would be no net zero, no Paris Agreement, no carbon taxes, no energy subsidies. There would be no ban on nuclear. There would be no arbitrary energy pricing mechanisms. Free markets and competitions will provide the best, most economic energy system, and a resource-rich country like Australia will thrive. The only thing that will prevent this from happening is if energy becomes too expensive or too unreliable, which is exactly where we are heading at the moment under the uniparty we've had governing for the last decade.
Right.
As Joe indicated, Tim Wilson's unable to be with us tonight, but he has sent the following correspondence to Joe, which I'll read word for word so it's clear. He says, "Dear Joe, I remain disappointed that the Bayside Climate Crisis Action Group have scheduled this debate before the election's been called and before all candidates have had a chance to nominate. It's for this reason that I've never indicated my intention to attend, despite being advertised to suggest otherwise. I also have another commitment tomorrow night, so I'll not be able to attend. I know the stated aim of BCAG is climate action, and as you know, I'm very proud of my long-term interest in the area. When I was last in Parliament and I served as Assistant Minister for Industry, Energy and Emissions Reduction, I passed the laws to establish an entirely new renewable energy industry, offshore wind. I'm proud that during my term in Parliament under a Liberal government, the national greenhouse gas inventory shows that emissions dropped from 123.7 million tonnes of CO2 equivalent in June 2016 to 121.3 million tonnes of CO2 equivalent in March 2019 and down to 106.5 million tonnes CO2 equivalent in March 2022. Since May 22, it has disappointed me to see emissions have risen to 110.3 million tonnes of CO2 equivalent in September 2024, and that current government has crashed the offshore wind industry for a failure to engage with and respect communities. Despite their rhetoric, Labor and the Teals have voted for at least $2 billion in new coal and gas subsidies to cover for failure to manage energy policy. And in the most recent budget, they have deliberately hidden the most recent data of the total quantum of new coal subsidies provided. And Tim's provided this graph. He says budget 2024-25, budget paper 3, part 2, bottom of page 103, an image has been provided of the chart. You can all study that and absorb that for a minute or two. I request you read out these remarks in my absence and send a copy to your membership. So I don't think we'll be doing that. However, it is recorded in the voice for the minutes of the meeting, which will be online. So thank you very much. I want to begin. I'll just ask some questions of the candidates. They may wish to take up some of the points being made by other candidates. I'm sure they will. But may I begin? Zoe Daniels, what are teals?
Well, teal is a brand that money can't buy now, I would say.
Yeah, exactly.
I think, that horse was well and truly out the gate. So given that many of you are wearing teal, you know that. But it's very much a media construct, and it's supposed to represent candidates who are green-leaning with conservative tendencies. So the mix of green and blue equals teal. I think that's extremely simplistic, and it's a label that gets used to describe a particular group of independents. But of course, although some of us on the crossbench are aligned, and we're particularly aligned on climate issues, we're all independents who vote different ways on different things. And if anyone actually looks at our voting record, you will see that we vote across the spectrum, depending what the issue is, according to the needs of our communities and the expert advice that we've taken and our own ethical positions and such. I'll just for a moment go to the comments that were made in the correspondence from the former member around coal subsidies. And I just want to put this to bed in this room once and for all. The coal subsidies were never voted on in the federal parliament. The federal parliament voted for caps on gas prices as a cost of living measure. There was no vote in the federal House of Reps or Senate on coal subsidies. Under legislation, because the federal government was taking action to reduce cost of living and limiting energy prices, compensation was due to the coal companies, and that compensation was managed by state governments. So it's not something that I ever voted on directly in the chamber, much as the way that information is being provided, it seeks to imply that. That's not something that happened.
I was going to ask this question of Alana, but I'm going to ask David. David, why don't we have the best education, health and public transport systems in the world? Should we be taxing our gas industry?
Well, the gas industry does get taxed. Everyone pays tax if they're a corporation. So in terms of education, we have a system now where education is a state responsibility, yet we have a huge department in Canberra. Why? like really, you've got duplication of activities. To me, libertarian values really try to limit the size of government and allow people to have more responsibility in terms of how they manage their lives. And, you know, to me, I think that taxing the gas companies is what you do. If you look at the mining industry, without Gina Rinehart's dollars, we would have had a major blowout in our deficit. So tax from these companies is what pays for your lifestyle.
You know, follow up, you brought the topic up, Alana, so I'll let you make another comment. Let's try that now.
I should be saying that. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So, to your question and to follow up with David, if we actually tax all of the coal and gas corporations, if we okay. Five. I think we voted.
Yeah.
Thank you. Hi.
I think it's on.
Hi. So, if we tax all of the coal and gas corporations,
It's not strong enough.
we still on?
It's not loud enough. Yeah,
The Greens have a fully costed plan to tax all of the coal and gas corporations.
Good.
And once we do that, and we stop giving them all of the subsidies that, as Zoe said, is not voted for in Parliament, but is decided by legislation and the government in power, we're left with around, let's say, around at least $74 billion, which is enough to, as the Greens have costed, put money back into the average taxpayer's pocket. We're going to give everyone free dental into Medicare. We're going to wipe all of student debt. So that's 100% of all student debt. Make all childcare free and free GP visits. As you've heard, the Labor government adapting the Greens policy recently because the Greens have a balance of power and have been pushing them to adapt better policies.
That one was on jumping around. I was out of order. So can we talk about net zero for a minute? I want to come back to you. We'll talk about bushfires and some other things. It's really important discussion and it's current. Is net zero 2050 a good policy currently?
I think it's required policy. You know, look, it would be much easier, wouldn't it, for all of us to just continue as we are without having to change anything. That would be much easier. Or indeed, as David suggested, go backwards perhaps. But I don't think that's a viable option. And the thing is that even without referencing, you know, a million statistics that I could pull out of my head about where we are with global temperatures and how much tax gas companies are paying, which is very minimal, and indeed the only tax that they've really paid has been since they had the windfall from Ukraine. Prior to that, they were paying almost nothing. But just look around you. You all know this. The horrendous floods, fires, storms that we're seeing, ever closer together, ever worse, communities struggling to recover before the next one comes. The impact on our insurance premiums, even if you just went to that simple thing, is unsustainable. You have roughly 25% of homes, I think, in Queensland that are uninsurable now. And with what we've seen even in the first quarter of this year, the fires in California out of season, followed up by a very southerly cyclone in Australia, coinciding natural disasters, so-called climate disasters, I don't call them natural disasters anymore, overlapping across the world, a lack of capacity, for example, for our firefighters to go and help in the US or vice versa, because we're now both having fires at the same time. I mean, you don't actually need to go and read the IPCC reports to see that this is happening. And self-evidently, if you're someone who lives in Lismore, who had that storm bearing down on you again in the last few weeks, when you still haven't recovered and you're probably not back in your house from the 2022 floods, that's horrifying. And that's happening all over the world. So we actually don't have a choice, and we have to stop arguing and face the reality that we can't continue to burn fossil fuels the way that we have been without consequences. And many people are already feeling those consequences.
What's your position on global warming? Are we responding appropriately? Is it as big an issue as?
Look, I think Zoe mentioned the temperature. I don't know if people here are aware of what the average temperature in the world is. It's 15 degrees centigrade. 100 years ago, it was 14.5 degrees centigrade. Now, I'm not telling something that's going to look up. You're going to look it up. It doesn't sound like global boiling to me. And I think that man has adapted. You can have a look. Man has adapted to everything that the climate has thrown at us. You know those horrific fires in California? How many people died in that? 29. It's sad for those 29 people, but it's not an existential threat. If you look at events, when was the last famine you heard of? Mid 4 million people died in China in the 1930s. 4 million. You had hundreds of thousands of people have died in floods and things going in the past. So if you look at it, look at the facts.
You look at the
Yeah. Anyway, I'm not surprised there's a diversity of opinion here. But anyway, look, if I can get you people to actually Google and look up things, it would make me say it's worthwhile turning up.
Google's an authority.
No, look up.
You would find that these are climate fueled disasters. Do you not believe that if we reduced our emissions highly, that we could prevent these events?
I can tell you, on the figures, it's clear that adaptation has saved millions of people.
Which
If you have a
adaptation? There is no
look,
adaptation
adaptation
yet.
has saved millions of people. I would like to know the name and address of one person, even one person, whose life has been saved by a wind turbine.
Let's move on. I want to tease out. I want to come back to one of the clear issues is the size of the federal government as a service. I want to come back to that. But I want to pick up on some of the comments that Zoe's been making about climate risk and perhaps disaster preparedness. I think the Premier of Queensland on something like what Zoe's been saying, 330,000 homes without power, 750,000 Queenslanders impacted, and that hasn't happened before. Are we ready for these sort of the sort of things you've mentioned? I see that David Pocock's comment was we're woefully underprepared for what's coming. I want to ask you particularly about the Office of National Intelligence long-awaited climate risk assessment report, which we haven't seen much of.
Yes, so I can't talk about what's in the report because it's a classified report. It has been publicly reported in the last couple of weeks that the independent crossbench members, including myself, were briefed on the contents of that report, having asked the government for more than a year for a briefing. So there was a lot of resistance to providing a briefing on that report. I don't think anyone in this room would be particularly surprised about what was in the report. And to state the obvious, I think, yes, we are underprepared from a domestic risk mitigation point of view and a resilience point of view, particularly when you're getting closer and closer together large-scale disasters and how we're going to manage that over time, both from a community point of view, a budgetary point of view, and a workforce and resourcing point of view. Because you've seen, for example, our defence forces repeatedly being sucked away from other things that they should be doing into supporting communities navigating disasters. But there's also a big regional issue here, and I'm not speaking to what's in the report, I'm just speaking to my own knowledge and other briefings that I've had. But obviously there's a big regional issue around food security, which goes to our national security, which goes to things like people movement, migration risk, and a whole lot of broader issues that we face as the nation that we are in a highly vulnerable region, because obviously Southeast Asia and the Pacific are particularly vulnerable to climate. And as someone who's, as I've already mentioned, worked extensively in those regions and also lived in both Phnom Penh and Bangkok, which are very low-lying cities, it's very self-evident to me what happens when you have increasing storm activity, sea level rise, in a city like Bangkok, which is a city of, well, official numbers are one thing, but probably 14, 15 million people, and it's 1 metre above sea level. It's pretty obvious what that equation looks like. So there's lots of bigger issues that we need to consider, as well as what we're doing in terms of mitigation and resilience in our particularly coastal communities. I'll let Elena have a go. You might have something to say.
About the coastal.
Yeah.
What is risk? And a preparedness for risk from global warming.
So we've seen the risk. We've seen what the climate-induced disasters can do to not just our own backyard, but obviously globally. We can see how it has impacts. All we can do is reduce as many emissions as possible. We can do that by stop approving new coal and gas mines. We can do that by stop giving out the subsidies to the gas corporations, and we can do that by redirecting all of that money into building our renewable energy sources and reducing our emissions targets as soon as possible. And we're obviously not going to do that by going along with plans that don't really exist for nuclear power. We can do that with the resources that we have now.
Okay, I'm going to go to Don and Mike, who I think will give us the first couple of. Have you got a Don? Perhaps have you got a microphone that you can take to ask a question? So we're actually promoting the most popular questions. The guys will let us know.
Yeah, indeed. Thanks, Rob. Can you hear me?
A bit closer.
Nobody knows how to use a line.
That's right.
Okay, thanks everyone for all the questions. Look, we have a lot of questions, so if you haven't answered a question yet, maybe don't worry, but do have a look at what's already out there, and if you like something, then upvote it, because we're going to be taking the most popular questions first.
Speaking of mine.
So the first question, actually, is not just for you, but it does speak to what you said initially, in terms of it not being a 3-year job to navigate the transition. So the question from Paresh Ratnayak is there a path to bipartisan agreements or multi-partisan agreements, as you said, in setting policy?
Well, looking at who's sitting on this panel, maybe not, because we all have to be in the room to have a conversation, and people who seem to be sort of removing themselves from the table need to come to the table. I think it's, look, obviously I sit in the sort of figurative and literal centre of the political spectrum between the two major parties, and I see one being timid and unambitious, and I see the other just abdicating responsibility on this issue. I mean, you saw one of the Liberal candidates say in the last couple of weeks that if the coalition's elected, there will be no climate target for 2035. And, you know, I mean, I covered Trump pulling out of Paris the first time. You've seen that happen again. You see the US backsliding on all of its progress on these sorts of policies. And it would be, well, not only shameful, but just economically ridiculous for us to do that when we have so much opportunity in the renewable energy space. So, you know, we all have to get in a room and stop the politics and the political point scoring and the flip-flopping on such an important issue. It's not the only one where there's flip-flopping, but it is a really key one. And try to create that multipartisan positioning. Look, you know, with respect to David, I think it's in many ways it's actually helpful to have David's perspective here, because it actually illustrates how difficult this conversation is, and how polarised it is, and how difficult that actually makes it to achieve policy change in a really polarised and divisive political environment, and a pretty unhelpful media environment too. And so for me, as someone who tries to be the problem solver and the collaborator, part of my job is to try to bring the conversation back to the centre so that we can actually have reasoned decision making around these things.
So, David, would 4-year terms help that dialogue?
Look, it does. I think with the climate crisis and policies in relation to it, I think a lot of it's taken out of our hands. And I hate to be to tell you bad news, but the rate at which other countries around the world are walking away from their climate commitments makes it very difficult for us to have a conversation in relation to it. And as much as you want it to be otherwise, and I can tell, I know every single one of you in this room are feeling so let down by countries like the US, and whatever you say about China, they're not doing a great job of helping the situation. And so I understand your despair in relation to this. One of the things I would want to encourage is to make sure we don't destroy our prosperity chasing a futile exercise. And if you don't think it's a futile exercise, I can't convince you. It may make you feel good. I understand that. It might make you feel fantastic about yourself. But the reality is those feelings are going to end up being disappointed in about 4, 5, 6 years' time when you realise no one else in the world is meeting their commitments that they have made under the Paris Agreement.
I think the US emissions peaked when George Bush was president.
Yeah, they've actually, the country that's lowered emissions most of the Western countries is the US, because they've got out of coal and gone into gas. Now that has enabled them to reduce their emissions because gas is less emission intensive, but it's still a fossil fuel. So if you really want action and you want to get rid of fossil fuels, it's going to be a very difficult task for us to have any impact in Australia. And I understand you might be trying to lead the world or whatever. It's going to be difficult.
No question, Mike? Let's not get on to public service for a minute.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Okay, this is a question from Margaret Beavis, directed at Tim Wilson, who's not here, but the others can comment on it. Institutional investors with $37 trillion under management rank nuclear power last out of 14 options due to very high cost and lack of maturity in the next generation technology. How can you justify this policy, which massively increases coal and gas emissions, leading to far greater climate impacts? That's the question.
Yeah. Comments? Perhaps Alana, do you want to have another crack at question of nuclear? No, lost your microphone. Yeah, sorry.
Thanks. Thank you, Tim Wilson, for your answer. Yes, obviously nuclear power is not the answer. It's more expensive, and it always has been. They've costed it for at least $350-something billion in the first phase. Assuming we even ever get to seeing our nuclear power plants, renewable energy is cheaper, safer, faster, and we have the structure to implement it right now.
And the same is free.
Similar?
Look, I'll offer a couple of points. One is that the framing that nuclear power will make energy cheaper is patently ridiculous when we're not going to see any nuclear energy for 15 to 20 years.
Or more.
So any conversation that we're having about cost of living now and pressure that is on people today does not tie to some fictional nuclear energy industry of the future. The second aspect is that the nuclear industry that we're talking about, which we don't have the expertise to build, by the way, because we've never done it, would be entirely nationalised and paid for by the taxpayer, when currently we have investors ready to invest in renewable energy being stalled by the fact that at some point in the future we might have nuclear energy. So putting a brake on that investment. As far as the cost benefit analysis goes, I mean, the recent analysis that I've had from Deloitte is that net zero should add $30 billion in new export revenue annually and 195,000 new jobs by 2070. That not doing it could cost 890 billion. So they're numbers from Deloitte. The cost benefit analysis stacks up for Australia because we have abundant sun, wind, and to some degree solar, water, in various forms and open space to do these things. And you know, my conversations with leaders from other countries, so for the British High Commissioner, for example, who said to me, look, people constantly bring up, oh, you guys have nuclear energy, we should do it too. She said, yeah, but we don't have solar because we don't have any sun. Why would you guys do nuclear when you've got abundant opportunity for solar? So in many ways, we have the rest of the world looking at us saying, why don't they just do that? It's really obvious for them. And what's good for them is not necessarily good for us. We need to actually traverse our own path on this, and we have a huge opportunity economically.
I want to change the subject a little bit, talk about the cost of government, but I want to tie it back to climate issues. So the federal opposition leaders talking about sacking 36,000 public servants in Canberra, which is interesting. The issue is from departments like the Bureau of Meteorology providing us with services about early warning for natural disasters and for state emergency services and those sort of stuff. So my question that I jotted down here, I think when Joe rang me 3 weeks ago, fewer public servants or more consultants, because we know that the previous government were spending 20 billion or 21 billion a year on consultants. So there's this balance of how do we provide the service that the community needs, but particularly perhaps in natural disasters like we've just seen with Alfred, or the likelihood of more bushfires. I think it's a critical issue, but I think it's drawn back to climate. So would you like to make a comment about that, David?
Look, in terms of getting rid of public servants, my belief is you need to fix the private sector as well. So unless it's combined with lowering taxes, you're not going to get the generation of production that's needed to employ people. So I think there's a combination. Obviously, things like early warning, which is adapting to climate change, I wouldn't be getting rid of people on early warning systems. I wouldn't be getting rid of people who can tell you how to do fire management. Zoe talked about the sea level. There is actually a country that is below sea level, and they've managed for a long time. So I think government departments have to realise that they're there to serve the people. And in terms of climate change,
So which country?
you don't need a whole department for it. You need a department of adaptation, would be what I would suggest, which is still about climate change. Because the climate change, you've got to deal with climate.
I think that department was abolished in the previous government.
Yes,
Yeah, well,
they
they
did. Yes,
probably
under
shouldn't.
2013.
To me, you've got to look at solutions, and solutions are dealing with what gets served up to you.
Okay, Alana, just on the things we need government to do for us in a time of climate change.
Well, there's a lot of things that they need to do for us at a time of climate change. But just on the sacking of all the government officials, I think that in the next federal parliament, if there is a good balance of power, whether it be in the House of Representatives or even in the Senate, the crossbench has the ability to push the government on a governing body that's going to be able to overlook all of this. They need to be pushed harder on what it is that they're doing within the government, whether it's sacking their current government officials and putting all that money back into private consultancies. They need to push the government to have legislation and a governing body to oversee these things.
Sorry?
Yeah, so at a general level, I'll make the point that after I was elected, we were avalanched by people in our community who were stuck in government systems, who were unable to navigate their way through anything from the visa system, the passport system, the NDIS, the aged care system, any level of Centrelink or Services Australia.
Veterans.
There was such an enormous backlog of people needing assistance because of cuts to the public service. Some of that has been rebuilt. So in the Home Affairs area, for example, and especially in what was Bill Shorten's portfolio, which is all of those Services Australia areas, which is basically, public assistance, welfare. There's been a lot of increased staffing, which has really alleviated pressure on the community, but also the fact that the only way people could get anything done through those systems was to come to their local MP, which is really disgraceful. I mean, firstly, we don't have enough resources to do it. And secondly, most people don't know that they can get their MP to help them. So anyone who we're not capturing is just flailing around going, what should I do? And not getting the help that they require. Secondly, it's just a complete false economy to sack the public service and then pay billions to consultants who tell you what you need to do. It's not only an economic or cost issue, it's the fact that you need your public service to be telling the government without fear or favour what their advice is, not telling the government what the government wants to hear in order that their contract gets renewed. Yeah.
We got a mic over there, Don, or we go?
I think it's working.
It's good. Yeah, very well. Go ahead.
So there's a question from Rose Reed. Thank you, Rose. For Zoe, Tim, Alana, Rewiring Australia found that Australia has found an average household could save $4,100 per year by transitioning to fully electrical appliances, vehicles, solar and batteries. What policies would you advocate to improve access to these benefits, especially those facing upfront cost barriers?
Who wants to begin?
I'm happy to take it. We'll start. So yeah, I mean, look, the numbers are really, really good. And actually, I was looking at some new numbers that came out this week from the Clean Energy Council. So there's about 4 million rooftop solar systems in Australia currently, and households and small businesses are saving $6 billion annually from having rooftop solar. They could really increase that if they had household batteries. And you will have seen that there's conversation around in the press that Bryn's been talking about this, various independents have been talking about how we do that. There's fairly minimal home batteries in Australia currently, so only 75,000 sold in 2024, according to these stats. And of course, as you all know, they're quite expensive. Some of the other independents, Helen Haynes and Sophie Scomps, and I think Allegra Spender have talked about, direct subsidies. I know that when I talk to small business in the electorate, it would really take pressure off a lot of our small businesses if they were able to install rooftop solar and had battery storage. I absolutely favour some form of assistance. It's a question of what that looks like. We've been sort of toying with some policy around revenue contingent loans. So like HEX debt, where basically you would be able to take out a government loan to fund your rooftop solar and your battery, and you wouldn't have to start paying it back until your revenue hits a certain level or until your income hits a certain level. Much cheaper, in fact revenue neutral over time, and would enable people on low incomes, start-up businesses to enter the system and put rooftop solar on without putting a massive hole in the budget. There's other ways of doing it, and this is just one thing that we're looking at as an option. There are some issues around workforce in this sector, and you don't want sort of every person in Australia to suddenly want a solar system, because then you end up with a lot of cowboys. So you have to sort of be careful. There's always unintended consequences. But it's absolutely an area, and there's huge low-hanging fruit in this area. And whenever I talk to Chris Bowen, the climate minister, I'm talking about how do we get more rooftop solar on. And sorry, I'm going on a bit, but one thing that's interesting to me in Goldstein is that compared to other electorates in the country, we actually have fairly low take-up of rooftop solar. So if you were to compare Goldstein to the northern suburbs of Melbourne, so lower socioeconomic, people have seen the benefit in putting on rooftop solar, but have also been able to access capped government subsidies to put on rooftop solar, whereas here, people maybe have been able to afford to pay their energy bill and also have not been eligible for a subsidy, so they haven't had that trigger on either side to actually do it. And I think, again, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit from an environmental point of view to get those people to do it.
Alana? Same response to this question.
Yeah, so first of all, the government doesn't actually make it easy to have solar panels or EV vehicles or around Victoria. And the one thing that they have implemented is they actually make you pay tax on owning an electric vehicle when you purchase it. So let's revert that back around. Why are we paying an EV tax? Why are we paying EV tax to purchase electric vehicles? We should be removing that completely. And the Greens will be subsidising solar and batteries for homes and businesses after the government puts funding into building the renewable energy sources and building up the power grid. There are 150 billionaires in the country. If we actually tax all of our billionaires, we'll have enough funding to do this. We won't just have enough funding to do this, but we'll have enough funding to put money back into subsidies, into homes and businesses for everyone to build their solar panels. We can incentivize solar panels, we can incentivize power stations for electric vehicles, and get the community running on electric power.
David, have
Yeah,
you?
it's a pity none of those billionaires are libertarians.
How do you know?
In fact, there are some who are libertarians. Look, I think electrification of everything is a great ideal, but may not be as practical as you think. And if you get rid of gas stoves and electrify that, you've got electric vehicles. Everyone has an electric vehicle.
No.
If you have artificial intelligence, it's actually a pretty demanding thing that's requiring a lot of electricity. And you have a 100% renewables grid. I'm not convinced that the ability of that grid to service the community. So you can try as far as I'm concerned, but I would think that electrification of everything needs to be taken very slowly.
Have you considered the health effects of gas?
For the past 4 months.
I don't know. I've been using gas all my life. In terms
You
of
can change that.
I'm not aware of the health effects of gas. So
Methane,
There's a question here for Zoe, which is how's the campaign going? I was actually going to broaden that. I was going to broaden it to all of you. There's, and I remember Kim Carr. I see a little bit of Kim Carr, as former Federal Minister for Science, because the Royal Society is concerned with science. And I asked him recently whether he knew who Kosamaris was. Of course he does. But he agreed with Kosamaris' proposition that we'll have a hung parliament. How would you like a hung parliament, so?
Bring it on.
Well, Alana, pinch Zoe's mic for a second. What's your view?
Well, the Greens would love a minority parliament. Obviously, we're not going to be making any deals to make a Dutton government, but we would love to make deals with Labor and push them further to adopt more of our climate policies.
when it comes to a minority government, it may not surprise you that my preferred minority government would be with the Liberal Party. That being said, one of the issues I see with the minority government is that the person who is actually leading the country is the leader of that minority party. Because if you really look at the politics of it, the major party, we've had a uni party for a long time, the major party cannot do anything without the support of that minor party. And so I think if it's the Teals or the Greens, good luck to them. They will be the most important party in the country. It won't be the Liberals.
If that was the case, who do you expect will be the Prime Minister?
Wait.
Well, I would assume Albanese will definitely start as the Prime Minister, if that was the case, and Dutton, if it happened to be with a right of centre party supporting him in a minority government. But the probability of Albanese lasting the term, I think, is fairly low, in particular if his popularity doesn't pick up.
Do you have a view?
Zoe for Prime Minister.
And actually, she'll be more important than the Prime Minister. That would be.
Now, the things we haven't talked. Sorry. One more question from Mike and Don. Yep, go ahead. You got a microphone? You do, Mike. Thank you.
Okay. this is one for Tim Wilson, but panel can comment on it. At the 2022 forum, you proudly proclaimed the coalition's interest in offshore wind generation. Given your leader's constant attack on offshore wind, including threatening to tear up contracts, do you regret your previous enthusiasm, or conversely, your leader's position?
Let's, whilst you've got the microphone, David, offshore wind, what's your view?
Oh, look, it wouldn't surprise to suggest I'm against it. I think the argument I have against renewables isn't about their ability to generate electricity. It's the environment. I think when you have a product that needs 230 times the amount of space. So if you have a nuclear power plant that has 1 kilometre square, you need 230 square kilometres.
I don't think we have any of those yet.
No, I know you don't have. But the problem is, they're putting in wind turbines in koala habitat in Queensland, 10% of the koala habitat. You've got wind turbines proposed in whale migration channels. To me, it's an environmental issue as much as anything else. So if you can find a solution that doesn't include wind turbines, I would support it.
I'm dying to make comments, but I'm not going to. Offshore wind. Delana? Yeah.
Obviously, the Greens are very pro wind power. I'm not too sure about specifically Tim Wilson's offshore wind farm. I know that the bill was sitting there on his desk for about 14 to 16 years before he even signed it or proclaimed that he was building them. So that was a bit interesting. But apart from that, I think that we should keep putting resources into finding better places to put the wind farms and building up our renewable energy sources.
Yeah, so obviously in favour of offshore wind, and I think the whale issue's been roundly debunked. But, you know, we do have to be aware of environmental impact of renewable energy. There's no doubt about that. And also social impact and bringing communities along. This is really a critical piece, and it is difficult. And those conversations are important, and regional communities particularly need to be included in them. I would say, just in response to David, you know, it's difficult to express environmental concern about wind given the damage that is being done by fossil fuels.
Yeah, exactly.
Obviously,
And the pollution and all that.
stack up. And then secondly, I don't think that you can make an argument about how much space nuclear power plants might take up in comparison when we won't have any for 15 to 20 years, and we can have renewable energy now. So, and the need for speed is really important. As to the former coalition government's energy policies, you know, I would just sort of reflect on the fact that largely members of major parties don't vote against their party. So to put forward a proposition that you really care about a form of renewable energy, but you can never actually get the party to support it, and you never really advocate for it or cross the floor against the party on any of their other core environmental decision making, calls into question how purposeful you can be and how much you can achieve within the boundaries of the encumbrances of the party.
I guess raise one more topic. And that is at lunch today, one of my workmates reminded me that if you reconstruct the acronym, which is AUKUS, it can become you sucker. My real concern as a scientist, and this was presented at the Australian Academy of Sciences conference in 23, and President Jagadish was on the television last night saying, AUKUS particularly really restricts Australian scientists to working primarily with the UK and the US. So Jagadish, who's got a semiconductor lab at ANU, one of the top 3 in the world, and he's asked, I saw him ask the current Deputy Prime Minister, as Minister of Defence, so I've got 2 Ukrainians, a couple of Taiwanese, 2 or 3 Chinese, no Australians in my 14-person lab. Are you telling me I need to shut down my lab? There are lots of implications of AUKUS, cost, the availability of the weapons, and just a quick comment from each of you, because I think it will be an important issue going to the election.
Look, it's an important issue because AUKUS really is our nuclear pathway to a certain extent. I think both sides of Parliament have supported it. I think there's some squeamishness coming out since Trump's been elected in terms of the major parties. But I think our national security is a priority, and I think if AUKUS helps, that's great. But the delivery of subs in 10, 15, 20 years make me not feel that great when I see the Chinese circumnavigating our continent. So I would hope that we'll get a speedy resolution in terms of AUKUS.
Alana? Well, I don't know what the Greens' position is on AUKUS currently. I don't think it will be entirely in favour.
Well, no, I think the government spends too much money on a lot of things. I think that there's a list of things that they could redirect the money at. If they're sitting there trying to spend all this money, why not give a little bit to free dental care? Why not make childcare free? Let's wipe student debt. It will only cost a fraction of what they're willing to spend on other things.
So defence is an issue, though. What's the Greens' position on security, national security then? Not supportive of expensive submarines, but
Well, no.
what about increasing our spend to 3% of GDP?
I think their costings are too high. So I think that they've built these costings to a greater length of what they need to be. And if they had a corporate government looking over it, I think you'd find that they could come up with a lower costing for that.
What will the community independents think about this if there was a hung parliament, Zoe?
Well, I think Malcolm Turnbull's described it as bipartisan gaslighting on AUKUS, and it's a pretty neat phrase, and it goes to a whole lot of things, but one is that it's bipartisan policy that's never been properly ventilated, and I think that's highly problematic. For something that's firstly, much as we would prefer not to have it, national security related, and therefore we do need to talk about it. Secondly, very expensive and also a very long time frame. I don't think it's appropriate that anyone who's been a critic of it, even up to this point, has been shot down in the public square. And obviously, with Trump behaving the way he is, whether we ever get the submarines is in question, if it wasn't already, because the naval shipbuilders in the US say that they actually don't have the capacity to provide them. So it's always been doubtful, and now it's even more doubtful. And that then,
But they've already received money from us.
no, well, and that then creates a whole set of questions around pouring a whole lot of money into expected submarines that we never receive, that may not be fit for purpose by the time we receive them, and actually may never have been appropriate to the environment that we have either, because a lot of people suggest that we would be better off with smaller submarines that are more appropriate to shallow waters. There's a whole lot of arguments there. So yeah, I think this is a really important public conversation. It's something that's been coming up a lot when I talk to people around the electorate in the last few weeks. It's something that's actually come up a lot over the last few years, because a lot of people have a problem with the opacity of that whole deal. And now that it's even more shaky, I think people do want to see a little bit more, well, a lot more rigour and transparency around, firstly, what it is, and some guarantees from the Americans that they can actually provide what they've said they can, because I'm not sure if they can.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think we could just discuss that topic for another hour. But I think that our candidates have done very well. That's been an hour and 4 minutes. Consider yourselves thanked. I was going to ask for a vote of thanks, but thank you all very much. It's nice to meet you all, and good luck in the campaign.
Yes.